Once upon a time, in a village called Logo, lived a princess, Princess Ngozi. She ruled as the absolute mistress of the entire village. Her beauty captivated everyone who looked at her, but her icy demeanor made even the bravest tremble. Ngozi never smiled. Her face seemed etched with perpetual anger. Her servants avoided her gaze, as each morning brought its share of yelling, reprimands, and punishments. Ngozi cared nothing for the feelings of others. She was the embodiment of authority and perfection. Every corner of the palace had to reflect her exacting standards, and even the smallest mistakes were immediately corrected. A speck of dust on the floor, or a poorly ironed dress, and Ngozi's fury would rain down mercilessly. The palace guards were no exception. They lowered their heads whenever they crossed paths with the princess. Even the bravest avoided looking her in the eyes, as Ngozi's wrath spared no one. Rumors circulated throughout the village about this cold princess, whom no man dared approach. It was whispered that she had rejected all the suitors her father, King Chidi, had presented to her. But Ngozi paid no attention to these tales. Love had no place in her life, let alone men. To her, they were weak and useless, and their mere presence irritated her. One day, after harshly reprimanding one of her servants for a clumsy mistake, Ngozi decided to leave the palace. She loved these moments when she could walk through the village and feel the power she wielded over others. Accompanied by two of her servants, she strolled through the market, indifferent to the villagers' gazes, as they moved aside to let her pass. The villagers avoided meeting her eyes, knowing the princess tolerated no weakness. Even the bravest lowered their gazes, not wanting to attract her attention. As she moved away from the market, Ngozi suddenly stopped. A gentle guitar melody floated in the air. It was a light, almost soothing music, something she hadn't heard in a long time. She turned abruptly to her servants. "What is that?" she demanded sharply. The servants shrugged, unable to answer. Intrigued, Ngozi signaled for them to follow her and headed toward the source of the music. The sound seemed to come from a small, secluded corner of the village near an old wooden house. Ngozi's curiosity grew as she approached. There, under the shade of a mango tree, she saw a young man sitting on a stone. He was playing the guitar with a serene dexterity, his fingers gliding over the strings as if dancing. He didn't seem to notice the princess. His eyes were closed, focused on his music, with an expression of tranquility on his face. Ngozi stopped a few meters away, observing this unusual sight. For a moment, she felt almost at peace. But the moment didn't last. A wave of anger rose within her, as if she refused to be softened by something as simple as a melody. "You," she exclaimed authoritatively. The young man opened his eyes and timidly looked up. He quickly stood, bowing slightly in respect. "Forgive me, princess. I didn't know you were here," he said softly. "Who gave you permission to play here? You dare disrupt my walk with your noise," she retorted harshly. The young man, whose name was Okon, bowed deeper, holding his guitar like a shield. "I'm sorry, princess. I'll leave immediately." Ngozi stared at him for a moment, debating whether to dismiss him or ignore him. Finally, she turned on her heel and walked away without another word. But in her heart, Okon's melody continued to resonate. Back at the palace, Ngozi couldn't focus. The image of the young man playing the guitar haunted her thoughts. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, just a simple villager among so many others. But that gentle melody, so unlike anything she had ever heard, refused to leave her mind. She grew angry at herself. How dared this boy disturb her tranquility with such an enchanting sound? Each time she closed her eyes, she saw his fingers gliding over the strings, and it disturbed her deeply. In the days that followed, she tried to resume her routine. She patrolled the palace, gave orders, and reprimanded those who dared make the slightest mistake. But even in those moments of anger, the music haunted her like a persistent echo in the palace corridors. Finally, after 3 days, she gave in to this curious obsession. She decided to return to the place where she had met the young guitarist. Accompanied by her faithful servants, she retraced her steps to the village, her senses alert, searching for that melody. But when she arrived at the exact spot, no one was there. The mango tree under which Okon had sat was empty, and the silence weighed heavily in the air. Ngozi felt a twinge of frustration. She lingered for a moment, hoping he would reappear, but nothing happened. She turned back, concealing her irritation. "It's better this way," she told herself inwardly. "I have no time to waste on trivialities." Yet, despite her resolve, Ngozi returned to that spot every day, secretly hoping to find Okon again. She didn't understand why this melody haunted her so much. She, who had always managed to shut her heart to emotions, was unsettled by a simple guitar tune. This loss of control perturbed her, and she refused to admit it. Her servants, who accompanied her, noticed her unusual behavior, but dared not ask any questions. They followed her in silence, content to obey. After several days without any sign of Okon, Ngozi eventually gave up her search. At least outwardly. However, at night, when she was alone in her chambers, she found herself thinking about him. Who was he? Why did he play that melody? And most importantly, why did it affect her so deeply? She tossed and turned in her bed, unable to find sleep. That gentle music lingered in her mind, but she refused to surrender to such feelings. One morning, as she walked in the palace garden, lost in thought, King Chidi joined her. He had noticed his daughter's distracted demeanor for several days, and was concerned. "Ngozi, my daughter, you seem preoccupied," he said gently, an unusual tone for him. "What troubles you?" Ngozi shrugged, unwilling to admit her inner turmoil. "Nothing, father. Everything is fine." The king studied her carefully. He knew his daughter too well to press the matter. He realized that when she was ready, she would come to him. But he could not ignore the new glimmer in her eyes, a glimmer he had never seen before. Later that day, as she stood by the window in her room, Ngozi overheard a rumor among the servants. A grand festival was to be held in a few days to celebrate the annual harvest. The villagers were preparing with enthusiasm, and musicians from all over the region were expected to perform. This news piqued her curiosity. She wondered if Okon would participate in the festival. Perhaps he would play again, and this time she wouldn't simply chase him away. She would take the time to observe him, to understand why his music had touched her so deeply. The thought of seeing him again filled her with a mix of impatience and nervousness that she couldn't explain. How could a mere villager trouble the princess of Logo? This was more than just curiosity, it was a kind of fascination that she couldn't name. The days leading up to the festival were marked by palpable excitement throughout the village. The villagers decorated the streets, the markets buzzed with activity, and laughter was more frequent. But in the palace, Ngozi remained silent, meditating on the upcoming encounter. She didn't know what she expected from this moment, but one thing was certain: something within her had already begun to change. The day of the festival finally arrived. The entire village was alive with excitement. The streets were adorned with colorful fabrics, and lanterns lit the path leading to the central square. Stalls of food stretched as far as the eye could see, and the air was filled with the aroma of spicy dishes mingling with the cool evening breeze. At the palace, Ngozi prepared herself with unusual care. She carefully chose a red silk gown embroidered with golden thread that accentuated her royal stature. Her hair was intricately braided, and she gazed at herself in the mirror for a long time before leaving her chambers. Her servants, surprised to see her so focused on her appearance, said nothing but exchanged knowing glances. The princess, usually so indifferent to festivities, seemed suddenly driven by a strange determination. Accompanied by an escort of guards and servants, Naya left the palace for the village square. Upon her arrival, the murmurs in the crowd immediately ceased. The villagers lowered their heads in respect as she walked confidently through the crowd. But beneath this facade of control, her heart raced faster than usual. Her eyes scanned the square, desperately searching for Emeka. She wanted to know if the melody she had heard days ago would once again fill the air. The evening unfolded with dances and songs, but there was no sign of the one she sought. She felt frustrated, almost disappointed, yet she didn't lose hope. The music from other musicians played on, but none evoked the same emotion in her as Okon's. As the celebration reached its peak, a gentle melody rose into the air, subtle yet enchanting. Ngozi froze in place. She knew it was him. Her heart leaped in her chest as her eyes swept the crowd until she finally saw him. There, sitting apart under a tree with his guitar on his lap, he played quietly, indifferent to the bustle around him, as if he were in a world of his own. Ngozi approached him slowly, her servants following at a distance, too afraid to ask questions. The closer she got, the more captivated she became by the music. When she was close enough for the melody to fully resonate in her ears, she stopped. Okon finally looked up and saw her. He stopped playing immediately, surprised to see the princess so close to him. He lowered his head out of respect, placing his guitar beside him. "Princess," he murmured humbly. Ngozi remained silent for a moment, trying to mask the turmoil within her. She gazed at him for a long time before speaking. "Why did you stop playing?" Okon, startled by her question, slowly raised his head. "I thought you didn't want to be disturbed, princess," he replied. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his response. "You think you're disturbing me?" The young man cautiously shook his head. "No, princess. I only wish to play music. If it displeases you, I will leave." Ngozi pondered for a moment before gesturing with her hand. "No? Play again. I want to hear that melody." Without hesitation, Okon obeyed, letting his fingers glide over the strings of the guitar once more. The music filled the air, and Ngozi found herself captivated by every note. For the first time in her life, she felt something she couldn't name. It was gentle, soothing, almost enchanting. The icy princess of Logo was slowly being drawn into the melody. When the song ended, she stepped closer to him. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. He smiled faintly, a shy but genuine smile. "I taught myself, princess. Music has always spoken to me. When I play, it feels like the world around me disappears." Ngozi remained silent for a moment, absorbing his words. She had never met someone like him, someone so simple yet capable of creating something so beautiful. "Why do you come here to play, away from everyone else?" she asked. Okon hesitated but eventually replied, "I've never sought attention. I play for myself, to free my thoughts. Here, it's peaceful. No one judges me." His words resonated with her more than she anticipated. Ngozi began to see a strength in his simplicity that she had never recognized before. She, who had always believed weakness lay in simplicity, was beginning to find power in it. Behind her, Ngozi's servants fidgeted, curious about the unusual situation. Yet the princess no longer noticed them. Her world had shrunk to this melody, to this humble young man who stirred emotions she thought she had forgotten. That evening, after listening to a few more pieces, Ngozi returned to the palace without a word. But in her mind, Okon's music continued to echo. Days passed, and Ngozi couldn't stop thinking about Okon. She didn't understand why this simple villager had captured her attention, but every time she was alone, his guitar's melody replayed in her mind. Her servants noticed her changing demeanor, but didn't dare speak of it. Ngozi, the once ruthless princess, seemed calmer, less prone to anger. One afternoon, as she wandered through the palace gardens, she found herself searching for an excuse to visit the village again. But what could she say? She had no justifiable reason, only an inexplicable desire to see Okon again. She scolded herself for the thought. How could she, the princess of Logo, be so troubled by someone so insignificant? Yet, the temptation was too strong. Finally, she ordered her servants to prepare her for a walk. They obeyed, though surprised by her sudden interest in the village. When she arrived, she instinctively headed to the spot where she had last found Okon. But this time, he wasn't there. Frustration welled up inside her. Had he simply vanished? Perhaps he didn't want to see her again. As she turned to leave, a gentle voice stopped her. "Princess Ngozi." She turned to see Okon, guitar in hand, emerging from behind a tree where he had been quietly playing. He smiled timidly, as though apologizing for disappearing. "I didn't want to disturb you again," he said softly. "But I'm glad to see you." Ngozi was silent for a moment before stepping closer to him. "Why did you stop coming here?" she asked, her tone carrying a hint of accusation. Okon lowered his head. "I didn't want to trouble you, princess. You seemed upset last time." Ngozi sighed, realizing she had indeed been harsh with him. "Keep playing," she finally ordered. "I want to hear that melody again." Without hesitation, Okon began playing once more. This time, Ngozi sat beside him on the grass, listening intently to each note. She felt strangely at peace, as if the music calmed the storms that had raged in her heart for so long. As the days went by, the bond between Ngozi and Okon grew stronger. Every afternoon, Ngozi found an excuse to leave the palace and meet the young guitarist. He didn't speak much, but whenever he played, she felt lighter, less trapped by her own troubles. However, Ngozi wasn't the only one to notice the change in her demeanor. King Chidi, ever attentive to his daughter's actions, began to worry. He had noticed her increasingly frequent absences and her silent returns to the palace. He wondered what was happening, but Ngozi remained enigmatic, refusing to address the subject. One day, as he saw her leave in the direction of the village, King Chidi decided to follow her discreetly, hidden in the shadows of the trees. He saw her approach a young man sitting under a tree, playing the guitar. Surprise overwhelmed him. His daughter, the proud and merciless Princess Ngozi, seemed captivated by this simple villager. He stayed in the background, observing their interaction from a distance. The young man played, and Ngozi listened, a light smile on her lips. The king couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was this really his daughter, the one he had raised never to show weakness, who was now being enchanted by a mere musician? Back at the palace, King Chidi decided it was time to speak with his daughter. He had to understand what was going on in her mind. That evening, as Ngozi was about to retire to her chambers, her father called to her. "Ngozi, come here, we need to talk." She stopped, surprised by the serious tone of her father's voice. She obeyed, sitting in front of him in the grand hall of the throne room. The king stared at her for a long time before speaking. "Who is this man you go to see in the village?" he asked directly. Ngozi's heart tightened. She hadn't realized that her father had followed her, but she wasn't about to lie. "He is a musician, father," she answered calmly. "I met him by chance." The king squinted. "Why do you spend so much time with him? Is he more than just a musician to you?" Ngozi felt her heart race, but she remained impassive. "No, father, he is just a musician. But his music, it soothes me." The king remained silent for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful, Ngozi. You are the princess of Logo. Never forget that. The villagers are not of our world." Ngozi lowered her head in respect, but inside, she knew that Okon's music had become a part of her, and she wasn't ready to let it go. The days that followed were marked by a latent tension between Ngozi and her father. Although their conversation had been brief, King Chidi's words continued to resonate in the princess's mind. She knew he disapproved of her visits to Okon, even though he hadn't explicitly expressed his opposition. But for the first time in her life, Ngozi felt free to make her own choices. This freedom, though fleeting, was precious. She continued to visit the village, always discreetly, to see Okon. He, a respectful man, never sought to overstep his place as a simple villager in front of the princess, but he could sense that something unusual was happening between them. Every time he played for her, he saw in her eyes a different glow, a softness she never showed to others. One afternoon, as they sat under their usual tree, a question crossed Ngozi's mind. She turned to Okon, her eyes meeting his. "Okon," she said softly, "why do you remain so humble, when your music is so beautiful? You could aim for much more in this village." Okon smiled gently, his gaze filled with serenity. "Princess, I do not seek fame or recognition. Music is my refuge, my own. It doesn't need an audience, as long as it resonates in my heart." His words touched Ngozi more deeply than she had imagined. She realized that her whole life, she had sought to prove her worth through strength and domination, while Okon found peace in simplicity. He didn't seek to impress, dominate, or rule, he was simply himself. But the peace of their meetings was about to be disturbed. The news of Ngozi's regular visits to Okon soon spread through the village. The rumors grew, and soon even the palace servants were whispering about it. The news made its way to the ears of other members of the court, causing varied reactions. Some were intrigued, others outraged, but all knew that if the king learned that his daughter was spending so much time with a simple villager, it could spark a crisis at the palace. Queen Mother, Ngozi's mother, was particularly concerned. She had always hoped her daughter would marry a man of high rank, worthy of their royal lineage. The idea that Naya could become attached to a villager was inconceivable to her. She decided to intervene. One evening, as Ngozi was retiring to her chambers, the queen barged into her room without warning. She shut the door behind her and fixed her daughter with a stern gaze. "What are you doing, Ngozi?" her mother asked coldly. "I can't believe you're spending so much time with this village boy. Have you lost your mind?" Although Ngozi was surprised by her mother's sudden visit, she remained calm. She knew this confrontation would come sooner or later. "He's just a musician, mother," she replied, turning toward the mirror to remove her jewelry. The queen was not soothed by this response. "A musician," she exclaimed. "You are the princess of Logo. Your future is already decided. You must marry a man who will help us maintain our power, not some lowly guitar player." Ngozi stood up slowly, facing her mother. "What if I don't want a decided future? What if I want to choose for myself?" This response surprised the queen. Never before had her daughter questioned her destiny. "Ngozi," she said in a softer voice, trying to reason with her, "I understand that you're curious, that you want to explore the world outside the palace, but you must understand that your place is here, among the nobles, not in the village." Ngozi sighed, feeling the fatigue of the conversation weigh on her. "Mother, I'm just listening to him play music. Nothing more. There's nothing else between us." But even as she said these words, Ngozi could not ignore the truth in her heart. She knew that her relationship with Okon was more than just listening to music. Every melody he played brought her closer to him, and even though she refused to admit it, she felt that something deeper was developing between them. The queen, however, was not ready to accept this answer. "It's over," she declared firmly. "You will not go back to that village. It's an order." Ngozi clenched her fists, her anger boiling inside her, but deep down she knew her mother had the power to forbid her visits. Yet, she was not ready to give up so easily. Ngozi retreated to her chambers, disturbed by the confrontation with her mother. She felt trapped between two worlds, on one side, the royal world and its obligations, on the other, the gentleness and sincerity of her moments with Okon. The queen's words echoed in her mind, forcing her to reflect on her choices. The following days were marked by palpable tension in the palace. Ngozi carefully avoided any contact with her parents and carried out her royal duties with apparent coldness. Every time she thought of Okon, she felt a mix of sadness and longing. Meanwhile, Okon was unaware of the internal struggles Ngozi was going through. He continued his daily life in the village, secretly hoping to see the princess again. However, the weight of her absence and the growing distance created a void within him. One evening, while Okon was playing his guitar under an old baobab tree, a messenger arrived from the palace with a serious expression. He announced that Ngozi would no longer be able to visit the village to see him. The news hit Okon like a blow to the chest. He now understood that things had become serious and that the situation was beyond his control. Ngozi, on the other hand, found herself chained by her mother's orders. She was forced to stay in the palace, where each day seemed heavier than the last. She avoided the places where she might encounter members of the court, seeking refuge in her chambers to cry in silence. One day, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She wrote a farewell letter to her parents and then to Okon, explaining her situation without fully revealing her deepest feelings. She left it under an old rug in the palace, hoping he would find it and understand. The letter was written carefully, each word charged with emotion, but expressed with apparent coldness to avoid raising suspicion. When Okon found the letter, he read it with growing anxiety. Ngozi's words broke his heart, but he understood the reasons for her departure. The message was clear: she had to stay in the palace, away from him, due to the pressure from her parents. The pain of separation was intense for Okon. He knew Ngozi hadn't wanted to leave him this way, and this understanding only added to his sorrow. He then embarked on a quest to find her, determined not to let her go without trying to save her from this unjust situation. Ngozi, meanwhile, had taken refuge in a secluded part of the palace, a secret space she had discovered as a child. She found some comfort there, but the solitude was overwhelming. Days passed, and she felt more and more desperate. Every moment away from Okon was unbearable. The rumors of Ngozi's disappearance spread quickly, and the queen ordered all available guards to organize a search. The orders were clear: find the princess at all costs. The palace turned into a hub of chaos and agitation as the guards went on patrol. Okon realized that the search for Ngozi had to be methodical. He questioned the villagers and travelers, looking for clues to her whereabouts. He realized that the palace and its surroundings had been thoroughly searched, but he persisted, still hoping to find her. The days passed, and the search intensified. Okon, exhausted by his efforts, eventually withdrew to the surrounding mountains. He wondered if Ngozi had sought refuge in this remote area, away from prying eyes. Meanwhile, the search for Ngozi continued. King Chidi, worried for the safety of his daughter, enlisted bounty hunters and private detectives to help with the search. The rumors grew more urgent, and the entire kingdom seemed concerned about the disappearance of Princess Ngozi. In her hiding place, Ngozi continued to hope that Okon would find her. She spent her days crying in silence, wondering if their love could truly overcome all these challenges. Weeks passed, and Ngozi felt more and more isolated. The search for the princess seemed to be leading nowhere, with few concrete leads on her whereabouts. Okon, though weary, did not lose hope and continued searching relentlessly. One day, while resting by a stream, a villager informed him that a woman matching Ngozi's description had been seen in the mountains a few days earlier. Filled with new hope, Okon quickly headed towards the region. He arrived in the mountains and discovered a series of tracks that seemed to lead to a secluded cave. As he approached the cave, he called out for Ngozi with a trembling voice, hoping his words would reach her. Inside the cave, Ngozi heard Okon's calling her name and rushed to the entrance. She finally saw him, head lowered, looking exhausted. Tears streamed down her face as she ran into his arms, seeking comfort and warmth. Ngozi and Okon spent the night in the cave, comforting each other. They talked about their future and the challenges they would face. The emotions were intense, and every word exchanged was filled with the depth of their love. Okon proposed they return to the palace together, hoping that this time things would be different. Ngozi, though still concerned about her parents' reactions, accepted with hope. They knew that their love deserved a chance despite the obstacles. The next day, they left the cave and headed back to the palace. Their return would not be easy, but they were determined to face the challenges together. The royal guards, though surprised to see Ngozi return with Okon, didn't know how to react. Upon their return to the palace, Ngozi and Okon were met with a cold reception from the king and queen. The tension was palpable, and the discussions were difficult. Ngozi explained her decision to return, stating that their love was genuine and their feelings could not be ignored. At first, King Chidi and the Queen were reluctant to listen, but Ngozi's determination and Okon's sincerity began to break down their prejudices. They eventually had to admit that their daughter had made a choice based on true love. After long discussions and many tears, King Chima and the Queen finally accepted Ngozi and Okon's relationship. They recognized that love could transcend social barriers and traditions. Ngozi and Okon's marriage was celebrated with a grand ceremony, marking a new beginning for the kingdom. Ngozi's parents, though initially opposed, witnessed the beauty of their union and the strength of their love. Their story became a legend, inspiring future generations to believe in the power of true love. Ngozi and Okon continued to rule with wisdom and compassion, bringing peace and happiness to their kingdom. Their love, tested by challenges and obstacles, remained a source of light and hope for all. True love can conquer all, yes, absolutely everything. Thank you for watching. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe for more enchanting tales from our channel.